You also told me that you had a dream that literally saved your physical life.
So a number of years ago, I woke up from this dream. And now I don't want to call it a dream in a sense. These visions, years later, I remember them exactly as they happened. And that's why I would make a distinction there, because this was not really a dream in that sense. But in the dream, we'll call it that, I'm standing on the edge of the water, and it's a very gray, ominous looking day, and the water is really rough. And you can tell that a storm had just been there. And there's this lifeguard standing next to me, and he communicates telepathically, which immediately gets my attention because that was only the second time in my life that I've ever had a vision where there was this telepathy happening. And he communicates to me, he said, "Don't be thrown off by the calm. It's going to get worse again before it gets better." And he turns around and he starts running at top speed. And I'm thinking to myself, if the lifeguard's running away from the shore at top speed, I'm better do the same thing. So I start running.
My guest today is Rob Sullivan, who had a spiritually transformative experience when he was working in a hospital, and an 18-month-old patient who died came to him after she passed away. And as a result, he has written this incredible book that is about beliefs that he previously bought into that no longer fit. And he actually had an experience where his life was literally saved by a dream. So this is going to be a fascinating conversation. So Rob, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Lori, thank you for having me on the show. It's an honor.
Oh, this is going to be a great conversation. I can already tell. We talked a little bit before. We're going to cover things like dreams and past life experiences. And you have gathered all of these incredible stories in this book. And I want to talk about that so everybody can find this book that you've written, because it's really, really impressive. But why don't we start with what your life was like before all this craziness called spirituality hit you over the head?
Sure. I grew up in downtown Chicago, typical Roman Catholic kind of family, and I went to church, made my first communion, confession, all that kind of stuff. And I remember when my grandfather died when I was like 14. And my biggest thing at that point was I think I prayed literally for a year because I was so scared that he somehow wouldn't make it to heaven. And then it was funny, he came to me in a dream about a year later. And I asked him, I remember saying, "Where have you been?" And he's like, and then he said heaven, and I was like, "Oh, cool." And then at that point, I let it go. But I realized that there was all this fear, and there's all these things like past lives. Definitely not raised to believe that. The first time I,
Right, right.
yeah, it was,
Reincarnation, all those things don't exist in
yeah.
the religions.
I didn't even like the idea. I remember when I heard about it, it was in George Harrison's song where he talks about keep me free from birth. And I can't think of the name of the song off the top of my head, but it's a great song. And I remember asking my dad about it, and he started talking about some of the different religions of the world where they will believe in like a caste system and reincarnation. And the way it was described to me, this working your way and slogging through all this horrible experience, just was like, oh, wow, I hope not. But then later I did come to believe that. So, I mean, it was just, but it was definitely not there from the beginning.
Rob, I think it's so cool that you asked your dad that question. And coming from this Roman Catholic upbringing, he didn't just shoot it down. He began to tell you about what other religions believe too. That's really interesting.
Yeah, my dad is an amazing, well, he died a couple of years ago, but my dad was an amazing guy.
Sorry.
He was a doctor. He actually passed the bar when I was a freshman in high school. So he didn't practice law. He was an expert witness. He was one of these like perpetual students. He was studying Chinese when he died. But the thing that really I was so impressed by was when I got into Reiki and some different things like that. He was right there along, and I remember him saying to me, he said, the Chinese, and some of the other shamans have been doing this work for thousands of years. He said, any Western physician who doesn't think that we can learn something from them is an idiot, basically. And he didn't use that exact word, but he was just always so open. And I remember even told me one time, he said if he didn't know what was wrong with a patient, he would just go with the back of his hand, he would scan their body from like a couple inches away. And I thought, I know he didn't learn that at Northwestern Medical School. No.
You think?
Yeah. Well, he could smell cancer too, which is kind of a cool thing that he could do.
I
Yeah,
know that dogs can do that, but I've never heard of a person being able to do. Did you ever ask him how he was able to learn that or how he was able to understand that?
Yeah, I wish we had talked more about it. I just remember him talking about it, and he said that there's only certain cancers. It's not like he could diagnose virtually anything that way, but he said you can smell it when you walk in the room. I remember him telling me that in one of our family friends, he saw her at a party and he went up to her best friend and he said, when's Carolyn having her baby? And Becky, her friend, looked at him and said, she's not having a baby. And he said, yes, she is. And she's like, I'm her best friend. If she were having a baby, I would know that. Well, 2 weeks later, she called him up and she goes, how did you know Carolyn was having a baby? You know, and the funny thing is, I actually had that happen to me one time too, or a woman I met for the very first time, when I looked at her, I'm like, she's pregnant. And then she found out 3 weeks later and told me that, yeah.
That's crazy. I love it. Well, these things don't, when you have an upbringing like you've had, these things don't spontaneously happen unless you had a very profound experience that leads you in a different direction. And you had that when you were a volunteer at a hospital in Chicago. So will you share that story with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I started volunteering at Children's Memorial in Chicago when I was junior in high school because it was funny. My college counselor at the time said, she's like, you got a pretty nice transcript, but she's like, you've never done anything for anybody. And my mom was the one who suggested, she's like, because I'd spent a lot of time in the hospital as a kid having operations on my feet and stuff. And she said, what about the hospital? And my mom's super intuitive. And so, she suggested me writing a book a number of years later. The couple of times that she's put a suggestion out there, it was always like the perfect spiritually driven thing. So I started volunteering there, and at the beginning, I used to just work with the kids they were well enough that you could play in the hall or do whatever. And then over time, as insurance companies got a little bit more restrictive about who could stay overnight in the hospital, you couldn't hang out there if you just got your tonsils out. It had to be a bit more. And so I started working with a lot of the kids who were in the intensive care unit, the cardiac care unit, the neonatal intensive care unit, and spending time just holding these babies and playing with them. And so there's this girl, I'll call her Annabelle. When I met her, she was 6 months old, and she had this smile that would just light up the room. Everybody loved Annabelle. And she was this person who, like, I only got to ever hold her once because of what she was going through. And literally her bones would have broken if anybody held her. And even when I was holding her, there was a pillow in between the two of us, but we just had this amazing connection. And every week for a year, I went to see her. And my friend Catherine, she and I would often go together. And every time, like I would even go like on holidays and extra time. Anytime I could go extra to volunteer, I would go and I would make a beeline for Annabelle's room. So I go in one day and they said that they had a meeting with the family and they realized that Annabelle was not going to, I mean, they knew that Annabelle was not going to make it, but they said it would be better if she died at home. There's really nothing more that we can do. And so, of course, we're all devastated because we all love her. And just, I mean, if she were smiling and you weren't looking at her, you would know she was smiling because it was just that kind of energy that came from her. Well, 3 weeks after she left the hospital, I'm walking up the street. It's a Saturday afternoon around 3 o'clock. I'm walking up Fullerton on my way to the beach. And all of a sudden, I just got this feeling that I just felt like I'd gotten this big hug. And I get a chill every time I tell this story. It's like she had come, and as I thought about it, the only real impression I had was that she had come to say goodbye. And she was basically saying, hey, Rob, thanks for being my friend. And then it was over. And that night, I remember I was home and I still vividly remember laying face down on the carpet in our living room and just like bawling my eyes out because this little girl, I just adored her. And what was interesting was when I got to the hospital on Thursday, which was my night to volunteer, Jamie, my supervisor, came up to me and she said, we got some sad news this week. I said, yeah, Annabelle died, didn't she? She looked at me, she said, how did you know that? And I said, it was Saturday around 3 o'clock, wasn't it? She's like, wow, how did you know that? It's like, I just knew. She came to say goodbye.
So sometimes when I interview people who have had experiences like that, they call them a shared death experience. Did you see anything other than the feeling that hug?
No, I got a chill when you asked me that. I wish I had, and I had been reading about near-death experiences. I'd read Betty Jane Eady's book and a whole bunch of other ones, and I was very open to the topic. Obviously, not open to dying early or trying to experience it firsthand, but I was interested in the topic. And as I look back, I wonder, knowing that I'm a bit more connected now than I was then, what it would have been like had I been really in tune. I've always been a little on the dense side, so Annabelle rather, must have had to really knock herself out to get my attention.
So you're about 18 when this happens, and you have this very religious Roman Catholic, everything fits in a box with how things are. And then this experience happens. And then what happens after that to your life?
Yeah, well, it was interesting because I really started thinking about things, and I thought to myself, okay, I was raised to believe that God is love. I was raised to believe that we only get one chance. And there were certain things like that I was raised to believe, but that didn't really fit for me anymore at that point because how and why would a loving God give somebody like Annabelle a week, a month, a year to hang out on the planet? It just and that would be her only chance. That just doesn't make any sense. And for people who think it is, fine. I'm not trying to change your belief or start a new religion. I don't accept that anymore. Because I believe in what I've seen, and I've seen it too many times with the kids at the hospital and what they're going through. They're here for somebody else. They're teachers. And I'm not egocentric enough to think that Amber, or I'm sorry, I'm thinking about another. I get some of the patients confused. Annabelle was not. She wasn't here for me necessarily, but I was one of the people who benefited from it. I'm sure she was probably here to teach her nurses and doctors a few lessons around compassion, open-mindedness. Who knows? Certainly, her parents, I'm sure, were involved in that equation. But she was a teacher, no doubt about it.
I love that you shared all of that, because there are certain things that happen in the comments, and we have these belief systems, and I feel that these beliefs ebb and flow and change over time as you accumulate more experiences, as you have more information that comes into you. And I always say to people, take in what resonates, let go what does not, because this is your journey and not everybody is going to be at the same place. There are things that I believe now that you told me that 12 years ago or 20 years ago, it wouldn't have fit. And so these things, you find different information, and when it feels right, you have to check in here, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that to me has always been the litmus test. How do I feel after something like that has happened? And whether it
Yeah.
was an experience like that, or whether it was a meeting with an intuitive or somebody who spontaneously shared something or whatever, it's like, does it feel right? I've met with people who are supposedly really gifted intuitives and whatnot, and I didn't feel very good after I encountered them. And there's no judgment there. There's a little thing called chemistry. Sometimes
Yeah,
you
that's the
have a
thing.
yeah, but usually that to me is the thing. Like, do I feel better, more peaceful? Does it feel aligned? Would be the word I would use.
Yeah, I think that that's a good litmus test also. So you have all of these experiences and you start exploring these different areas. You wind up writing this whole book, but you also told me that you had a dream that literally saved your physical life. So can we start there, and then we can
Yeah,
go into
absolutely. Then
everything
we
else?
bounce around. Yeah, time doesn't matter anyway, right? So
Right, exactly. I love that.
yeah.
Yes.
So a number of years ago, it was literally December 30th of, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. I woke up from this dream, and now I don't want to call it a dream in a sense because I've had a couple of dreams that were more what I would call visions. Because a dream to me is something like there's a dream that I had last night that I've been trying all day to remember some of the details. It's just on the edge of my memory. These visions, years later, I remember them exactly as they happened. And that's why I would make a distinction there, because this was not really a dream in that sense. But in the dream, we'll call it that, I'm standing on the edge of the water, and it's a very gray, ominous looking day, and the water's really rough. And you could tell that a storm had just been there. And there's this lifeguard standing next to me, and he communicates telepathically, which immediately gets my attention because that was only the second time in my life that I've ever had a vision where there was this telepathy happening. And he communicates to me. He said, "Don't be thrown off by the calm." it's going to get worse again before it gets better. And he turns around and he starts running at top speed. And I'm thinking to myself, if the lifeguard's running away from the shore at top speed, I'm better do the same thing. So I start running, and by the time I catch up to him, there's a wall to my left, and this wall is like 50 feet high. It's got huge cinder blocks that it's built with. And it's about this thick. So when I get to the wall, maybe a little thicker, when I get to the wall, this wave crashes into it and I can see, because at this point I'm even with the wall and I can see both sides of it. 90% of the water was blocked by the wall, but this 10% got through. And then you could see, like, coming out the other side, like seaweed and plants and things like that, in addition to the water. And then I looked up, and I was obviously on some sort of a peninsula, because I remember looking up and there was water in front of me as well. And I just had this feeling that it was sort of all around. And I woke up immediately and I thought, wow, that was just striking. And the dream stayed with me all day. So I go in the morning, I went to the gym, was my first stop. And at the end of the working out, I had pulled a muscle or something in my shoulder because my collarbone was bugging me. And so I was just kept rubbing it. And I was like, it really was a big nothing sort of thing, but it was enough that it had my attention, but it didn't hurt. So first appointment was with this guy, Dr. Kolikian, who's my orthopedic surgeon, to get a cortisone injection in my ankle. And I just happened to ask him, I said, why, because my ankle was bone on bone, that was why I was getting an injection. I said, why, if there's no cartilage there, why would the pain be a couple of inches above that? And he said, that's referred pain. He said, and he literally said, he goes, it's as if you were having a heart attack, it's that sort of thing. I was like, oh, okay, interesting. My next appointment was an endodontist, because my dentist had sent me there. He was concerned about a tooth. And he said the guy takes his 360 x-ray, and it was a tooth on the top. And he said, is that tooth sensitive to hot and cold? I said, that one is not, but the one immediately below it is. He said, oh, that's referred pain. He said, it's the same. He goes, it's coming from the tooth on the top. And I'm thinking, why am I hearing about referred pain twice in one day? Now, for people who don't know what that is, a great example of it was I was getting a shot one day at the hospital, and they were doing it. I think they were putting an IV in my arm, but they were doing it right at the elbow, and they hit something. And whatever it was that they hit, the nerve pain from it happened in my little finger, not in my elbow, where you would think it would happen where the needle was, but it wasn't. So anyway, that all goes down. This thing had stopped at that point, so I wasn't really concerned about it. And then I had a couple meetings, and at 6 o'clock, I'm literally walking up Grand Avenue. I was going to this place called Gringos where they had these amazing shrimp tacos, and I'm like, I am so hungry. I couldn't wait to get there. And I get to the corner of Grand and Ogden, and this comes back. And it immediately got my attention, because I'm thinking of the dream, going, okay, there it was in the morning. It went away for a while, and now it's coming back exactly like what the lifeguard had described. And so this is going to sound weird, but I looked up, and there were people around, so I didn't say it out loud, but I silently said to myself, do I need to go get this checked, or can I go get shrimp tacos? That was my exact question to the universe. And the answer came back immediately, you need to go get that checked. So even though there was an urgent care facility about 6 or 7 blocks away on Lake, I decided I'm going to get an Uber. So I got an Uber, go over there. They hooked me up, and the woman looks at me and she goes, you need to get to the hospital immediately. She said, you are having a heart attack. And when I got there, what they realized was the artery on the left wall of my heart was 90% blocked, which was exactly like the dream. The wall on the left was blocking 90% of the water. And people ask me, they're like, do you think that was your dad? Because it was about 6 or 8 months after my dad had died. And I was like, no, my dad does not run that fast, but I'm sure he played a part in that.
I love that that was your distinction.
Yeah. So I am so grateful, because, well, it was interesting because just then in July, I was at a college reunion, and one of my roommates from freshman year is now an emergency room physician. And I told him the story, and he looked at me and he was blown away. He goes, Rob, he goes, that's the Widowmaker. He said, you are the luckiest guy ever. And even the cardiologist at Northwestern, he brought in like 14 medical students to hear my story. And I love the fact that he was open to it. They were all blown away that I had this dream that saved my life.
Well, I love that, because you not only had the dream, but then you knew that there was something significant. You listened to it, it caused you to pay attention in a way that it wouldn't have And that probably wouldn't have happened at every period in your life. It's only
Yeah.
because you've been searching this stuff and you understand there's more than what we're experiencing in this physical body. So, what led up to all of that, to you being able to have that experience? Because one of the things I love about having these conversations is that the people who are listening are a lot of times searching. They're open to things. They're trying to figure out, like, what is the meaning? How do things work? And when somebody like you has an experience, you didn't just all of a sudden have that experience. There were things that led up. So will you share with us maybe a few of the very pivotal truths that you uncovered that led you to be able to be that discerning?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the question too, because the way that I would describe it is there are signposts on our journeys that are sometimes only visible in the rearview mirror.
I love it.
Yeah, and so one of the things, like, to give you an example, I've always been really, really into music, and the very first house concert I ever went to was a guy named Dave Crossland. Dave Crossland is this amazing singer-songwriter who wrote a song called "The Ballad of Joseph Schultz," which is all about a German soldier. And so I was really taken with the song. I bought the CD, I listened to it constantly. And then I had an opportunity to take a songwriting workshop with Dave. And during the break, he taught me how to play the song. And it's easily one of the most intense songs I've ever heard. And now, okay, what was fascinating to me about that, on a couple of different levels, is my dad was in the Air Force. I was born on an Air Force base. And and my dad loved the Air Force. Even on his deathbed, there was this part of him that he asked my mom, he's like, "Am I back on active duty?" He just loved it so much. I was terrified when I was a teenager. Was thinking, okay, when I'm 18, I hope there's no draft, and if there's a draft, where am I going to go? Because I knew that I didn't know why, but I knew I wanted nothing to do with it. Now, this song thing was interesting because, again, this song is, again, it's about this German soldier, and it's about, there were two German soldiers actually, and there's the one Joseph who joined, and because there was there's an actual statue of Joseph Schultz. That's how Dave happened to write the song. And there's questions about whether or not it's a true story or not, but whatever. The idea is that he joined, he got to the very first battlefield, they took the town, and then the captain lined everybody up and told the people they were going to shoot them. And Joseph's like, nothing doing. Why are we shooting women and children? This is not what I signed up for. So he takes his gear off and he goes and stands in line. And of course, his friend who's with him didn't do that. And so he's shooting and he shoots everybody but Joseph. And then the captain didn't flinch. The lines in the song is, the captain didn't flinch. He simply raised his arm again. "Oh, Joe, why are you doing this? Don't you know that I'm your friend? Yet you stand before my rifle and you know what I must do. Show me some way out of here. I don't want to hurt you." And then he has to shoot him. And I always get a chill even just thinking about that. And then at the end, he said, "Why? I was only following orders, Joe. You should have done the same," is the very last line of the song. And it was this really powerful sort of thing. Okay, well, fast forward, there's a woman named Teresa Rowley in Chicago who does these amazing readings. And it's hard to describe her readings because she was raised Catholic. And in fact, she was talking in one of our sessions about how she was very in touch with spirit from a young age, but spirit basically told her, don't tell anybody that this is going on because nobody's going to believe you and they're going to think you're crazy. But now she's very open about it and whatnot. And so I go to this session with her, and my big question at the session was, why is my business not taking off? Why am I not getting any traction? And now she had no way of knowing that I wasn't getting any traction or anything like that. So when I went there, I tried to be as neutral as possible. I said, she's like, "What do you want to focus on?" I said, "Yeah, I'd like to focus on just work stuff and see how things are going." And she starts tuning in and she said, "You have the most elaborate system of stuffing your feelings I've ever seen." She said, "It's really beautiful what you've created," but she said, "I don't think it's working for you anymore." She said, "Do I have your permission to look into this a little bit further?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely." So she's like, "Say your name 3 times." I did that. And then she's blowing and snapping and doing all this, stuff.
She's
And then,
energy clearing, by the way, for the people who are
yeah,
watching. She's energy clearing.
yeah, it was, there was a lot of work to do because she starts going and she's like, oh, and this is over the course of minutes. So I'm like on the edge of my seat going, "What are you seeing?" And she looks at me and she goes, "You had a lifetime as a soldier in a Nazi-like regime. And she said, you, at the end of that life, she said, you did not want to do it from the get-go, but she said, your family expected you to do it. Your country expected you to do it. And she said, so you joined and you basically said, I'm only going to follow orders. That's it. But she said, the problem was you followed orders really well. So you got promoted. And when you're promoted, and she said, when you look back at that lifetime, you realized that you had really screwed up and you made a commitment to yourself. She said, now we have to see if it's a vow or an agreement. But she said, your agreement or vow was that you were going to spend the rest of your lifetimes in service of humanity with no expectation of reward. Okay, well, that would clearly explain what was happening with my business and why things weren't taking off. So to her credit, she's not one of these charlatans who wants you to buy candles and do multiple sessions. She's like, let's clear it right now. We'll figure it out. Turned out it was a vow. She walked me through how to get rid of it. We got rid of it. So fast forward a week later, this is the first vision dream that I had. I went to bed. It was a Friday night. I'll never forget. I was waiting for my friend Dean to come over. He wasn't sure if he was going to because he'd gone to a soccer game. So anyway, when I decided to go to bed at 10 o'clock, I was like, I hope he doesn't come over because I really just want to go to bed. So I wake up at 12:10 and I was exactly, now this is wild because in a dream, if I were dreaming of my house, it would be different. I'd know it was my house, but it wouldn't be the same. This was my house, same night, everything exactly the same. I'm back on the sofa, exactly where I'd been right before I went to bed. And then I hear the doorbell and I go down and I'm thinking it's him. And I go down and open the door and this being rushes at me. And I mean, it was bizarre. The next thing I know, this being and I are back in the living room. He's on the far side. I'm standing at the kitchen side with my back to the stairs. And I'm looking at him and he communicates telepathically again. He said, I am that part of you responsible for stuffing your feelings. You can't let me go. And I'm like, whoa. And so I'm thinking about everything that I've learned spiritually and from all the different books. I'm like, how am I going to handle this? So I did a little dancing and fortunately a little divine enlightenment later. I looked at him and I said, thank you. Thank you very much. You were there for me at a time where I really needed you. I don't need you anymore. It's time for you to go. And I made it really clear that this was over and there was no discussion. So I turn around. Next thing I know, I'm seeing him outside the door again. And he's wearing this trench coat and a top hat. And he's got like a Dick Tracy jawline, which is really interesting because I was never really into cartoons. So why Dick Tracy would be the image, I have no idea. But a week later, after this, when I'm telling Therese about it, I was at an event and Therese was there and I was telling her the story. And there's another woman who asked if she could listen in. And neither one of us knew her, but we're like, yeah, sure, absolutely. And so I told Therese the whole thing. And I said, I get that it was an amazing vision. And Therese had added a few things. She said, waking up at 12:10, she said, that's very relevant from a numerology standpoint. It had to do with endings and new beginnings or something like that. But then I said, the only part that I don't get is that there was this little brown dog that led the being away. And I said, that part I just wasn't clear on. And she's like, yeah, I'm not sure either. And then the woman looks at both of us and she goes, I know what that was. We're like, you do? She goes, yeah. She said, well, when you wouldn't agree to host this being anymore, it had to get led away by something. And a dog represents unconditional love. And we're like, oh, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
I
So
just got chills all over.
isn't that wild? And so now Therese, again, she wouldn't have known anything about like the Dave Crossland thing or the song. There's no way you can't write that off in my mind as coincidence. It's just not.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. All right. First of all, I did not know where you were going when you first started this story with the whole song, but it ties in exactly to what you said a little bit ago, is that sometimes in hindsight, we can see the guideposts. And this is interesting. And what I really love about the story the most, Rob, is that you honor your intuition and you listen and you don't just push it off as this is a coincidence. This is just some random event that happened. You try and figure out like a puzzle how to put this together. And you found like 4 parts to this. So first of all, you've got the song, which is really important. And if people think about what they're drawn to in their lives, when you are completely drawn to the lyrics of a song or a poem or something along those lines, you need to pay attention because it's probably the universe trying to speak to you in a certain way. So you have that aspect, right? And you want to say something, so go ahead and add right now. Go ahead.
Oh, you spirit. Well, I didn't even think about this until just now, but there's an earlier aspect to it too. And I talked about this in the book. I, as a little kid, was in the Boy Scouts. I did it as a way to get out of the house on Tuesday nights and play dodgeball. But what was interesting was, I don't know why they didn't make me do it. I was the only member of the troop who did not have a uniform. And I did not want a uniform. I hated the idea of wearing a uniform. And so that's another little signpost with that whole thing. And if you look at a Cub Scout or Boy Scout uniform, it does have sort of a military sort of feel to it. And so there were, and none of that made sense to me. I didn't really give it that much thought, but as I reflected on my life, and there were all these different little things that lead me to believe that past life that Teresa uncovered probably happened. Whether it was in Germany or whether it was in Russia or whether it was somewhere else thousands of years ago, who knows? But it happened. There's no way, because it affected me in so many different ways.
First of all, who doesn't love dodgeball? But secondly, of course, that would make so much sense. You wouldn't want to wear a uniform that represented the control that you had brought into this. And you mentioned something that I've actually never heard anybody talk about before from your intuitive in Chicago. And that was that when she was doing the energy clearing and she uncovered that past life, she said to you, we need to figure out if this is an agreement. And then she further looked into it and she said, oh, it's a vow. Let's clear it. So will you, if you understand this, maybe you don't, can you explain to everybody watching what a vow is and how it's different than an agreement that you would be able to clear it? What does that mean?
So the way that I think of it, and she may jump in at some point in the comments and watch this and correct me if
Oh,
I'm
I
wrong.
hope she does. I
Yeah,
would actually
she's
love to
great.
have her on the show. She'd be
Oh, I'll
really
put you in touch with
fascinating
her.
to talk to.
She's amazing. I interviewed her on my podcast, so you can even see that too if you want.
Oh, yes.
Talk more about the corporate side of things, but you could totally get her to do this. Anyway, the way that she talked about it was an agreement is like if you make a decision that you want to go on a diet. Okay, I made this agreement with myself. I'm going to do this. And it's an agreement until it gets derailed by a donut.
Or
So,
chocolate. I love that you
yeah,
said that.
exactly. It seems really great in concept, and then you wake up and you're hungry, and then it's like, never mind. But
You
a
have just
vow on the
described every time I ever try and do a diet.
yeah, exactly, right? It's like, yeah, the idea of cutting calories is not a doesn't work. But a vow is okay, this is something, it's more than an agreement. It's something that you have to, like when we cleared it, as I recall the visualization, I had to imagine, because I think I had to visualize the actual contract that I had come up with.
Are you talking about the agreement now? Or are you talking about the
Oh,
vow?
no, I'm
'Cause it
talking about the
sounds
vow. Sorry, the vow. Yeah, I was visualizing that. And I think I was either visualizing that to write on it something like canceled or whatever, or I was creating a new one that basically said, I release myself from that. And then we visualized destroying that in a flame, I think was how it went.
I
Um,
love that because that's super powerful. I mean, people are listening, they're like, I don't know, see a trash can, put something in, light it on fire, but it has a lot of power to it. And that's not the
yeah.
first intuitive that I've heard talk about doing things that way.
Well, and the interesting thing too is, okay, I would love to be able to look at you and say, I'm this brilliant business person and my business turned around after that. And it was these three things that I did. I didn't do anything different after that. But my business did turn around. And I went from literally circling the drain financially to a place where people now look at me and they go, how do you travel so much? How do you take so much time off? And a big part of that came from, well, part of it came from overcoming a scarcity mentality, which is a different issue altogether. But a big part, the timing of it corresponded exactly with Therese in clearing up that past life. Because if you have this agreement or a vow that you're going to serve humanity and get no reward for it, the universe will deliver that to your doorstep because that's what you asked for.
I love that. That's so powerful. I hope everybody who just heard that rewinds it and listens to it again because this is really and truly how you learn to create what you want to have in your life. Was because we are powerful beings and we are so very good at manifesting, but we manifest what we think. And if we're not thinking the things that serve us, then we're still manifesting.
Yeah.
So you, because of all of this, gathered really unique, interesting stories and put it into a book. So let's talk a little bit about that book and some of the story topics. You don't have to get into all the details about it because we don't have enough time. We actually should probably have another conversation where we could talk about it more in depth because I'm super enjoying this. But tell us a little bit about what you put together and where you found all these stories.
Sure. The book is weird. My first book I did fairly quickly, and it was a job search book, and it all happened right away. This one took literally 10 years, and it seemed unfinished. And the whole idea ultimately was that every chapter was on a different topic, and they were all things that I was not raised to believe, but that I've come to accept. So there's a chapter on dreams, there's a chapter on intuitives, there's getting into past lives and things like that. There's all these different chapters on all these different topics. The last chapter of the book, oddly, was the missing chapter turned out to be going through lymphoma a number of years ago, and how everything that I learned along the way about alternative medicine and whatnot all conspired to get me through that journey in a really beautiful way where I never felt like I was fighting anything. In fact, the words that we used, a friend of mine was going through cancer at the same time, and we talked about how we didn't have it because having is possessing, and neither one of us had any interest in that. Talked about we're experiencing tumors and use the
Hmm.
be
Because
careful.
the word that you use as an accelerator either takes you forward when we say if instead
Yep,
of when, those types of things really impact what happens, right?
absolutely, yeah. And if you say I have, I don't even want to say it out loud, but if I were to use the word have in the context of the tumors, then it sounds like it's a possession that I'm holding on to, as opposed to say I'm experiencing cold that will be gone in a couple of days. And that was what we were visualizing. And that is exactly what happened. And it turned
I love that. Hold on a second. This is so powerful. I do not want to move away from this thought. This, like everybody listening, think about, I want you now for like the next day to see how many things you say that actually are a possession. Like I have a cold, I have, or whatever that causes this lack mentality versus I'm experiencing, which just means it's temporary. This
Yep.
is really, I love this, Rob.
Yeah, thank you. And it was just something that God bless Jackie, my friend, that she and I had these conversations, and also my friend Shanoa, because they were both very instrumental in the language around it and talking about it. And it turned out to be this beautiful thing. Now, would I want to go through it again? No. 400 plus hours of chemo inpatient, not my favorite thing. What I learned from it and how it opened me to, I used to think tears of joy. I thought that was just an expression. I had tears of joy on a number of occasions, and I realized, wow, that's real. And I was blown away because I didn't think they were real. I thought it was whatever. But and that was the missing chapter of the book, but it tied everything together from the dreams and other people have shared. That was a cool thing. My editor was like, she's like, do you know of other people who've had similar experiences? Because she was one of those people that she's my target audience because she's one of those people who was on the fence about, I want to believe this, I'm curious, I'm interested, but I've never had the right doors never opened so that I could walk through and say, yes, I accept this. The doors usually experience in some way, shape, or form, but that's whatever. So she was the one who said, do you have other people? And I said, yeah. So we ended up getting, I think there's like 70 or so different people who are mentioned and whose stories are shared in the book. And some of them are on people who had it started out early on, people who were disillusioned with their own religion and what they and how they grew spiritually on their own in a different way. Some of them, there's some traditional stories of like grandmothers who saved people at intersections, kind of thing. The couple of my favorites are we have three different vanishing twin stories. Two from the perspective of the surviving twin, and one from the perspective of the mother of one of those surviving twins, which is
Wow.
mind-blowing stories. And I didn't even know that was a thing until all this happened. So it was a beautiful experience that people would so willingly open up and share very personal experiences to basically to let people know this is real. People may not talk about it, but there are things that are well beyond our understanding.
So was your publisher's name Kristen? Is that what you said?
Oh, no, my editor.
Or editor? Whoever
Yeah,
that was. What was her name?
yeah, yeah. She was the one who was she.
On the
In fact,
fence?
yeah, I can't say which story it is, but she even submitted a story for the book anonymously because she
Oh.
had an experience that was really amazing.
Well, what I was going to say about her is I feel like the where she was, where she wants to believe this stuff, but then people don't want to feel like they're gullible and they're just buying into something that doesn't have any real merit to it. And I think you've just described probably a lot of people who find these experiences, these interviews and watch them. But what I love about that is she wanted you to go out and seek others to share those stories, because this is what I say to people when somebody shares some type of a synchronicity, they got a sign, and I get lots of signs, or they have a story like what you told that confirmed that you had a past life and you have all this evidence for it. Your experiences confirm mine, and my experiences confirm yours. And I think that's the beautiful gift when we share these things, is that we really help each other to really buy into and believe that our own are even more real. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And it was funny because it was my friend Carolyn from high school. When I shared my first story like this, it was the story that I had written, which is absolutely true, of being cured of narcolepsy, a sleep disorder, by a hands-on healer. Now, narcolepsy is something that Western medicine says they can't do anything about. And my dad had sent me to the neurologist and whatnot. And after a year of testing and sleep studies and genetic testing that confirmed that I had all the genes for narcolepsy, they came back and said, you're going to be on Ritalin and Prozac for the rest of your life. And by the way, drink more coffee. And I said, nothing doing. And so, with my dad's full support, I went on this journey to not have to go down that path. And long story short, after countless medical intuitives and Chinese herbalists and acupuncturists, I found a guy who practiced what he called the Atacama healing method, and he cured me of narcolepsy, something that Western medicine says can't happen. And when I wrote that whole journey out, she said, Rob, I've always wanted to believe this was true. If it weren't coming from you, I still wouldn't believe it. And that was when I really thought about it. I thought, I do need to write this down and I do need to tell this story, because my background it was advertising. I worked as an options trader at the Chicago Board of Trade. I am not your typical psychologist, need to get more clients for my business, so I'm going to write some controversial book. I had more to lose than to gain by writing it, but I couldn't ignore the call that it needed to be done.
Wow. Well, I could talk to you. I wish we had more time. I could talk to you for seriously probably another hour, but I'm sure that who are listening are with you. I know you have your book and I know you have your own podcast. So tell us where people can find you and work with you.
Yeah, so the easiest thing to do would be to go to the website, atrekwithin.com.
Trek, Treck, Trek
T R E
within.
T R E K.
Oh, it's Trek.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then within.com.
Okay.
And
So
then,
a Trek, Trek within.
yeah. And
.com.
then
Okay.
at that website, there's a contact form, but there's also, more importantly, you can download a free chapter of the book, either in audiobook form or in, what do you call it?
PDF.
Yeah. Yeah. And that way you can get it, see if it resonates with you. And then if it does, then go ahead and get it.
Nice. I love it. Rob, this has been so much fun. You are so interesting and I love it. And I love that you compiled all this so that everybody can go and take a look at it. And I want to thank you so much for what you are doing to help wake up the collective consciousness. It is so needed right now.
Thank you. It's absolutely an honor to meet you and to be on your show. And yeah, if you want to do this again sometime, let me know. I'm absolutely down for it.
I think we will definitely be doing this again. But thank you, and thank you everybody for watching. Next up, check out this playlist of other NDE interviews. Please like and subscribe. It really helps this channel to grow so I can bring you more content. Thank you for watching. I'm so glad you're here.